All right, let's dive right into this explainer. When we usually think about ancient architecture, we picture people building up, right? Stacking stones to make massive pyramids or towering temples. But in the Indian subcontinent, ancient engineers did the exact opposite. They literally carved entire architectural masterpieces straight out of living mountainsides. Today, we're going to explore how these stones speak to us, revealing a wild 800-year story of shifting empires, sheer practical problem-solving, and honestly, some incredible religious tolerance. To help us wrap our heads around 800 years of history, we'll follow a quick roadmap. 1. The birth of rock-cut caves. 2. Monks' retreats, Chaityas and Viharas. 3. The Golden Age begins. 4. Multi-faith marvels. And finally, 5. The evolution of stupas. So, here's our temporal map. We're tracing a timeline that kicks off in 321 BC with the Mauryan period, shifts into the culturally diverse post-Mauryan period around 200 BC, and really peaks during the Gupta period starting around 275 AD. Keep these three eras in the back of your mind as we go.
All right, Section 1. Birth of rock-cut caves. The Mauryan Foundation.
During the Mauryan period, instead of building from the ground up, engineers just began carving directly into solid hillsides. Take the Sudama and Lomas Rishi caves in Bihar, for example. The finely carved arched entrances are just stunning. It's actually a piece of craftsmanship that mimics the wooden architecture of the time, which proves how they were experimenting with translating temporary wooden structures into permanent, unyielding stone.
The absolutely crucial takeaway for these Mauryan caves, which are located out in the Barabar and Nagarjuna hills, is their structural simplicity. They really serve as the blueprint for everything that follows. Think of it kind of like a modern lobby leading to a VIP room. You've got a rectangular interior hall for gathering, which leads straight back into a highly specific, focused circular chamber.
Moving on to Section 2, Monks' Retreats, Chaityas and Viharas.
As we roll into the post-Mauryan period, shifting populations and foreign influences actually split these structures into two totally distinct types. First up is the Chaitya. You can think of the Chaitya as the grand spiritual heart of the monastery. It's a dedicated space where monks gathered for worship, specifically designed to draw your eye toward a sacred stupa placed at the far end, usually under this soaring, semicircular roof. Now, the contrast between Chaityas and Viharas is fascinating because it highlights how brutal weather actually drove architectural design. While Chaityas were these vaulted, beautifully lit prayer halls with horseshoe windows, Viharas were built for pure survival. They served as heavily practical residential monasteries, carved out of rock purely to keep monks safe and dry during those intense, months-long Indian monsoons.
When you look at the Karle Chaitya in Maharashtra, which is the largest of its kind, the scale is just breathtaking. You've got towering, beautifully carved pillars lining the pathway, the walls were polished to a mirror shine, and the roof above was carved into a perfect semicircle, literally guiding the assembly of monks straight toward the stupa. It is just a masterful manipulation of space and stone.
Now, contrast that grand space with a typical vihara. The vibe here is incredibly grounded and functional. You essentially have a central square hall surrounded by smaller open cells. They're basically ancient dorm rooms accessible through an entrance porch. Places like Kanheri in Mumbai and Junnar in Pune are fantastic examples of how the practicalities of daily living dictated the shape of the stone.
Which brings us to Section 3. The Golden Age begins, the Gupta period.
Entering the 4th century AD, we hit the Gupta Empire, widely known as the Golden Period of Indian architecture. The key takeaway here is this massive aesthetic leap. By this point, the engineers had already mastered carving stone. Now it was time for the artisans to take over. Those cold rock walls were no longer just structural boundaries. They became vast canvases brought to life with vibrant, stunningly detailed murals.
Just look at the beautifully detailed interiors from the Ajanta caves. You can really see the heavy Buddhist influence here, which was sponsored by the Vakataka kings. Under their patronage, artisans utilized this complex fresco technique, carefully painting directly onto the walls. It was an incredibly painstaking process, but it created absolute masterpieces designed to survive for millennia.
But here is a wild structural quirk about Ajanta. Out of its 29 caves, that's 25 viharas and 4 chaityas, there are 0 open-air courtyards. And why is that? Well, because the ancient builders were working with a sheer 90-degree drop on a perpendicular cliff face in the Western Ghats. There was physically no space outside. So every single square inch of these caves had to be painstakingly carved inward, straight into the dark.
Let's look at Section 4, Multi-Faith Marvels,
Ellora, Elephanta, and Ba.
Moving just 100 kilometers away to the Ellora Caves, the map itself tells this stunning story of peaceful multi-faith coexistence. Out of a massive complex of 34 caves, 17 feature Brahminical influences, 12 are heavily Buddhist, and 5 show Jain influences. Having 3 major faiths carving monumental structures right side by side, that speaks volumes about the radical religious tolerance of the era.
By comparing Ellora to Ajanta, we clearly see how the terrain dictated the final blueprints. Remember Ajanta's sheer drop and total lack of courtyards? Well, Ellora was carved on a gentle slope. This stroke of geographical luck allowed builders to carve massive open-air courtyards right in front of the temples. It even allowed the Buddhist caves to expand upward into grand double and triple-story complexes.
And you know, this innovation wasn't just isolated to Maharashtra. Over in Mumbai Harbor, the Elephanta Caves boast 7 caves primarily dedicated to Lord Shiva. Fun fact for you, they actually earned their modern name from colonial rulers who thought the exterior rock looked like an elephant's face. Meanwhile, over in Madhya Pradesh, the Bag Caves feature 9 brilliantly frescoed caves, which were initially developed by a Buddhist monk named Jataka, so the techniques were spreading, adapting, and transforming landscapes everywhere.
Finally, Section 5, the evolution of stupas. For our final structural deep dive, we're shifting focus to monumental freestanding structures. Under the Sunga Dynasty, stupa architecture underwent a massive upgrade. Prior to this period, they used materials that simply degraded over time, but this era brought stone into the mix on an unprecedented scale. The Bharhut and Sanchi stupas stand today as breathtaking examples, wrapping the sacred mounds with intricate, permanent stone carvings that depict the Jataka tales.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I want you to consider this. We have the Brahminical Sunga dynasty pouring resources into building Buddhist stupas, and over at Ellora, 3 distinct faiths are carving masterpieces side by side. Architecture really is the ultimate mirror of a society's true values. These stones do so much more than show us engineering feats, they reveal a deeply tolerant society that prioritized coexistence over division. Makes you wonder, what do you think our modern architecture will say about us in 2,000 years? Thanks for hanging out with me today.